welcome to our Innovation Insights Hangout series, Planning for 2016, How Innovation Management is Evolving. And today we'll be talking about how we include how to use lean startup, design thinking, and all the other buzzwords, or some of the other buzzwords, to improve innovation management in your programs that you have today and as you get into 2016 and scale beyond. Okay, so it's very timely. We're in December, end of the year. And again, appreciate very much everyone joining. Do have polls. If you have questions, please be sure to submit them. We'll go probably for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll make sure that we jump into the questions for those folks that have joined. All right, and please do know we're out in social, hashtag innovation, hashtag leadership at Bright Idea, and we will send you the record. And we will make sure that it's one record with all of the content in it based on our little changeover today. All right, Bright Idea is the best innovation software to power your innovation efforts. We hope that you will visit www.brightidea.com and check out our new apps, including apps for design thinking, our research app, our hackathon, 20% time and more, which really helps you accelerate innovation in your efforts for 2016. With that, I welcome Jim Lundy. Thank you, Jim, for joining. And he is the CEO and lead analyst of Aragon Research. He's here to give us his excellent insights. And Aragon Research is an industry analyst firm that focuses on technology research and business advisory services. Jim serves as lead analyst for social collaboration, content management, learning, sales, and marketing and knowledge. He's got over 29 years of technology and management experience as a vendor, user, and analyst. So we're very fortunate to have him. For anyone who missed it, he can share his Google fun fact, meaning the fact that you cannot Google about him, so you have some extra insights. Jim, welcome, and thanks for joining.
Thank you, Gretchen. It's great to be here. Yeah, my fun fact is that I was a travel soccer coach for 10 years. So I don't think I'm out there on the Google very much on that. But yeah, I had a lot of fun. And, you know, you learn a lot about innovation when you're trying to accelerate performance of a bunch of soccer players. So, and you transfer that into business. So glad to be here.
Great, great. Welcome. So let's jump right into the first couple questions, which I know some folks had heard, which was, can you address the trends you see in 2015? And will they have impact on people's innovation programs and their success in 2016, and why?
Yeah, there's a number of trends, and I think the big thing is that there's more change now between 2015 and 2020 than there's ever been in the last 30 years of technology. And that's why it's becoming so hard, and that's why you have to take some of the guesswork out of it. And you do have to basically institutionalize the idea of bringing out those ideas from your people, because it's not just one chief engineer or one chief product officer or even a CEO that's going to have the idea. There is a great idea that's probably lurking either in your customer's head or one of your engineers or even a product manager, but you've got to surface those and you've got to make it more of a formal program. And really, that's really one of the big things is we still see a lot of people using gut check. I think this is the right one, but they don't vet it, they don't test it. So when you talk about some of the trends, and I'm just going to put up a quick slide on, these are some of the things that we're spending a lot of time talking to enterprises about, which is, how do I leverage cloud-to-cloud capabilities in my services? How do I build a platform that leverages third-party applications? What's the innovation story around that, and how do I get started on that? And if it's going to become IoT versus mobile, is my business at risk if my competitor connects their service online through apps that turn on things? Is that going to put me at risk? You know, we know there's a lot going on today with things like delivery services. I came up to San Francisco on a train yesterday, and you know, Amazon was advertising they can do 1-hour delivery service. Well, it's not via a drone yet, but they're testing that. And so what's that do to delivery companies? Does that put an impact on them? What are they going to do to enable faster delivery services? So and then when you finally look at the last thing, which is probably the hardest, is how to make my application smarter. So when you look at all of these things together, obviously humans and computers are going to work closer together. But from an innovation perspective, there's a lot of moving parts. and what is the science of figuring out how that all comes together. So that's really, when you look at it, what we spend time with talking about people. But when you say, how does an enterprise tackle this? Well, first of all, you got to start talking about it, and you got to start basically getting into some of the principles that we're going to talk about in the rest of this webinar.
Yeah, good point. Very good points. And just to keep things rolling here, let's talk a little bit in terms of, with lean startup and design thinking opportunities, how they impact the enterprise, and then maybe jump right to, and how could they be leveraged to innovation, to improve your innovation management program. And then from there, we'll be able to get into some of the new content that folks, I'm sure, are waiting on.
Well, you know, one of the things that's really, when you actually look at both lean thinking, design thinking, and, you know, other terms, and I'll just put one of the popular terms that's used in Silicon Valley and around the world is this idea of minimum viable product. So that's really one of the things when you look at all of these different approaches do have ideation at some phase in the process. And so when you actually look at, you know, the principles of, for example, design thinking, the first thing that usually pops into people's head is, oh, I need better UX. That's really not what design thinking is all about. And then when you say, well, I need to have a minimum viable product, well, what is the vetting and what is the discussion around what's in and what's out? What's the gotta have features versus the nice to have features that allow me to launch and learn that service quicker than making it the perfect product? And I think that's really when you look at some of the things relative to preparing for 2016 and some of these new disciplines, you know, there are differences in how companies approach this. And, you know, we talked earlier about culture is one of the big things. But when we talk about some of these approaches and how you start preparing for 2016, one of the things that you have to start doing is looking seriously at your approach to innovation, saying, am I letting everybody participate? And so that's when you start saying, if you have a program that rewards people, for example, for participation, then sometimes those ideas come out. And you know, I shared a story before about when I was a general manager of a software company. I had young engineers approach me saying, I have this idea, or even a senior engineer saying, I want to lead the mobile management, the development of the mobile app. I said, yeah, but that's not really your job. He says, yeah, but I want to do it. And we worked it out so he could, and the agreement I cut is he had to mentor the younger engineers because they weren't as good as he was, and he didn't want to do that. But I said, well, that's the deal. You know, we need to get better. So if you want to do this as a side job, then you got to coach these guys. And so finally we were able to work that out. But before I got there, that was kind of like, do not speak up. You piss off the chief engineer, do not speak up. And so I think when you look at culture and making it more of a program, you know, our take is some of the best ideas are actually hidden inside the heads of your employees and your customers.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very fair. And, you know, Jim, it was interesting. You and I were talking about our impressions and thoughts on innovation management and what's going to happen in 2016. And one of the discussions came up is Silicon Valley. You know, we're both in Silicon Valley, you know, and we're like, is it this way everywhere? Is everywhere talking about lean startup and design thinking? So would love to hear your thoughts on innovation management. Is it different in Silicon Valley versus the rest of the world?
Well, yeah, I would say, you know, you live here, I live here. I've lived on the East Coast a lot of my career. And I would say, yes, it is different. You know, when I was at Xerox, I had the opportunity to work at Xerox PARC for a while and learned an awful lot about how they approached innovation. And so when I ended up going to Rochester, so it was completely different. And the culture was not one of really wanting to innovate. So I think there's a couple things in Silicon Valley that come to mind. First of all, embracing technology is one of the things I see happening faster in Silicon Valley. I think the other thing I would probably say is there is an expectation that, you know, launching products and services sometimes faster, but the idea that not being afraid of change and not being afraid to embrace some of the new technologies. Now, look, it is bleeding over, and you know, you've got other parts of the world, other parts of the United States, you know, all kinds of pockets saying we're going to be the new Silicon Valley. And you know, it is kind of an ecosystem, and you do have some major universities that are feeding the ecosystem and producing college graduates that have already been trained in the ideas of, for example, design thinking. So I think when you actually look at it, you know, the big takeaway for enterprises is For example, how do you draft off of some of the cultural things that are out here? Do you have an office out here? Do you interact and talk about some of the things that companies are doing to innovate? And, for a lot of the established enterprises, how are you making innovation part of the culture? And I think really that's really one of the secret things is innovation is part of the culture of Silicon Valley. It's expected. And so there are a lot of debates. There's a lot of discussions almost every single day. And I think that's one of the things I don't see as much outside of Silicon Valley. It's more of the boss said we're going to do this, so that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. You had a slide about the shift to predictive, I think it was. Do you want to share that and comment on it? I thought it was a good one.
Yeah, sure. So there is one of the things when we talk about technology that we see. This is really one of our examples when we talk about what's going on in Silicon Valley and the idea of adding predictive capabilities to an application. So one of the things that you see here is, let's try it again. Let's try this again. I'm going to share that slide. Okay, so this application is our best take at how do you say we go from a legacy application approach to one that embeds more machine learning or predictive capabilities. And so to net it out, today a lot of applications, you run the application like maybe CRM, it produces a report, and then I have to sit there if I'm a sales manager and try to figure out, like, is my pipeline big enough? Whereas the predictive approach is it's looking at data real time, it's making suggestions in real time to the individual, like maybe you ought to call this customer or maybe you ought to send them an email. And so it's basically making suggestions based on pattern recognition. So wait a minute, how do I make my applications more predictive? So, Gretchen, that's one of the things when we actually talk about how things are changing, we hear about, companies in Silicon Valley, yeah, we're making our apps predictive, and we're going to have that out by the middle of 2016. So when you start talking about 2016 planning and innovating, how do I take my apps from being dumb apps to be intelligent, predictive applications? That's the biggest race. It's besides digital marketing and go-to-market and online selling and commerce, predictive is one of the biggest conversations happening in Silicon Valley right now.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. So let's also talk about mobile. We've talked a lot about how important is it, to innovation management and the overall strategy that people have for 2016. It's interesting for us at Bright Idea, the customers are definitely interested in mobile, but the question is really how much is it going to impact how fast innovation accelerates? I think you and I have talked that we believe it's huge. But I don't know if everyone else does. So what are you seeing and what do you think people should do to incorporate mobile in their innovation management strategy going forward?
Well, I hear this a lot. And, we had a recent conference and I showed a slide that talked about the impact of mobile. And if I net it out, because I don't have the slide to show here today, 7 years ago, Microsoft was twice the size of Apple. And today, because of mobile, Apple is twice the size of Microsoft. So was it the phone? Was it the apps? Was it the ecosystem of the combined offering? And the fact that Apple has 1.5 million apps on their devices and Microsoft only has 300,000. So 5x difference in apps. How does that bleed over? We think by 2020, there's over 20 million apps in the enterprise. A massive uptick because of all these devices are going to be connected. So when we talk to enterprises about responsive design, a website that's responsive versus a native app, we still have arguments about it. But it's hard to argue when you look at one company that is now the iPhone business for Apple is bigger than all of Microsoft. Nobody saw that coming. No one predicted that would happen. But when we talk about the impact of apps where you can take 8 screens and compress a business process into an app, that has tremendous ramifications for the way businesses are going to be run. It's not my quote, it's Mr. Nadella from Microsoft who says the 6-inch device is the new standard desktop. And again, more of us are doing more things on our mobile device every day than we ever have before. I mean, I use my phone more this year than I did last year. So when you actually look at that, it says, well, wait a minute, I need to be able to do business on that mobile that new platform, that mobile device, that means maybe I need to have apps that work on that device. So I think that would be one of the things I would say, Gretchen, relative to the need to innovate and to incorporate more mobile capabilities into your service faster.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And I mentioned before our big push and differentiator now we're pushing out is the apps, because you can frankly accelerate innovation through the apps and leverage some of these buzzwords we're talking about today, design thinking and 20% time and things like that to really move your innovation management strategy forward. And so definitely we're all about mobile. We're very focused on mobile, but it's also an area that we're continuing hearing from our customers that it's going to take time to everyone get on board. So we'll see where it goes. So Jim, how are you seeing companies structure their innovation resources to be set up for success, like dedicated leaders and teams or shared resources part-time? And then how will it evolve in 2016?
Well, I think we see a lot of different approaches. There's executive approaches to drive, for example, digital transformation is also one of the new buzzwords for innovation. So you're seeing at the executive level. We're also seeing, in product teams where, again, a platform like Bright Idea might be added to the equation to bring in more thinking from, non-product people that are both customers and non-customers, and also just the internal teams themselves, like a young engineer in India that has a great idea. So those are some of the things where, it looks, usually what it is you got to have a beachhead. Somebody's got to step up and say, we need to do this. So some senior support, but in some cases, it's just kind of like, how some of the approaches to how software is developed using, for example, Agile, it kind of starts to take hold. There is generally acceptance now that every company knows they are not moving fast enough on innovation. And I think the challenge and the opportunity is how do we do that more? And again, a lot of early adopters, and they're probably Gretchen, some of your customers, they're already well ahead and they've already established program offices and things like that. But a lot of the other ones are just still basically using gut and instinct, and they're not using science to really vet those ideas. And I think that's really when you start looking at it, is if you're going to make it part of your culture, then you got to make it easier to do, which means you probably need to instrument the business, which means, well, how am I measuring innovation? And so that's where platforms and services like Bright Idea come into play.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So let's do just a quick summary recap so we can get to the Q&A. We got a lot of good questions that have come in. So Jim, could you just recap what innovation management leaders should be considering in planning for 2016? Obviously, the whole topic is planning and how innovation management's evolving. So just address really what should maybe you pick 3 things or so that they really ought to be considering.
Well, I mean, so look, I think there's 2 things. One is, are you leveraging new technologies in your service? Are you moving fast enough on mobile? Do you have and by the way, if you do have a mobile app, do you have a refresh plan for it? Are you adding more technologies into the service to make it fully digital? So digital transformation. Are you vetting this stuff? Are you having contests? Are you getting people to vote? Do you have data? And again, I say data because, again, a lot of these innovation platform offerings are helping to surface things that would not have been surfaced before. So we actually look at, how am I measuring the rate of innovation, the kind of innovation, how do I measure that? And again, today a lot of people are not. So really for 2016, which is make it more of a program, start to measure it. And what might be kind of fascinating is all of a sudden you got that new idea that everybody says, that's it. That's the thing we were missing. And everybody rallies around it and you make it happen. But again, we still see, so the rule of thirds is, if a third of the enterprises out there really have program offices and 2/3 don't, and a third are thinking about doing it and haven't invested yet, I think the big thing is, well, because I hear a lot of companies say, well, our CEO wants me to investigate why Apple innovates so well. And, my comment is, really, you have to think about that. Do you think they have a cultural thing? Do you think that's part of their DNA? Do you think their new building is being built just like an iPhone? So when you actually look at that, so, the problem with a lot of enterprises is you can't just snap your finger and say, we're going to make this happen. So everybody has to embrace it, and you have to start thinking like we need to, for example, we need to change. How do you change? You innovate. So, you know, again, you know, and I stress that because I do run a company, and, you know, we measure a lot of things. And, you know, if you can start to measure the impact of, you know, bringing more innovation into it. And by the way, if you're doing design thinking or lean, you have to do innovation. So the question is, how do you measure it?
So, Jim, you've been great, and thank you for flexibility as we juggled things, because people were great to hang in. I know we only have about 5-10 more minutes. We may go about 5 minutes over for anyone who can stay. I do want to give the respect and answer the questions people have, so we're going to go ahead and jump into those. One question that came up, it looks like a few people actually asked it, was, can we repeat the name of the software that made hackathons easy to implement? I'm assuming that they're referring to when I had mentioned that I had gone and used our apps. So I proudly say that that's Bright Idea, and love to have you go to our website, brightidea.com, and you can see the apps right on the homepage, and would be very, very happy to have anyone contact us for a demo or take you through any of them. Okay, so I would love to hear from you. And then Jim, questions for you. You just talked about culture. So if there's anything you want to add, this one's really asking who specifically out there is training their people in innovation really, really well?
Well, you know, I mean, I would say that, you know, there's a lot, I think there are a lot of pockets in every company where there are people that are the evangelists for we need to drive change. And, you know, it's funny that you say that, because one of the things that Steve Jobs did, not to pick on them for a minute, but, you know, organic innovation, they developed training programs about innovation at Apple before he died, and they keep those pretty secretive, but a lot of employees go through that kind of training. And so that even raises the question of, you know, if you have, you know, one of the things we talk about sometimes with people is you're consciously, you know, unconsciously competent. You're innovating, but you don't know why. A lot of 100-year-old companies say, well, we have a process to figure out what we're going to bring to market, but it's just a process and we don't know why we do it, but we've always done it that way. So can you be consciously competent at that approach? For example, training people to recognize, you know, that's a good idea. Training people to say, maybe we need to test that idea. How do we integrate that into the product? And again, some of the design thinking approaches would be definitely one of the things I would probably say is, if you haven't looked at some of those things relative to some of the steps, I mean, again, there's other methodologies as well relative to innovation. You know, for example, I mentioned launch and learn. Minimum viable product, but, you know, at some point in the design stage where you're trying to figure out what those users want, there's the idea of iterating around that potential idea and maybe derivatives. So it's not like my idea is the best, we must do it this way, versus, well, wait a minute, why don't we test this, you know, this kind of the concept that's a slightly different. And, you know, for really big product launches, you know, like cars and things like that, they do tons of design testing. Before, you know, prototypes, they show them at car shows, they get reactions from people. So there's a lot of gut instinct and there's a lot of testing. And so when you talk about bringing that into a culture, just step back and say, well, wait a minute, how do we do things versus how other people do it?
Yep, makes sense. Definitely. Culture is definitely a hurdle that we hear from a lot of our customers, that they have to be the big champions and find new, different ways to continue to shift. And it's that whole transformation, right? Really get people to believe that innovation is something that they need to take more time to invest in to be able to accelerate in the marketplace. So another question, in your opinion, Jim, who is executing the best concept or idea exploration, prioritization, and quickly designing clickable prototypes to bring ideas to life?
Who is, well, so here's what I would probably say is we see, I mean, we just did, you know, we recognize, you know, technology providers, what we call hot vendors. Every year we've done it for 4 years. There's tons of firms that are doing great jobs with that. The thing that's fascinating is there's tons of new applications available for desktops, but for mobile devices that are business centric. And you know what's kind of fascinating is, you know who finds those at our company is the millennials. Hey, I found this new app. And so, you know, one of the things that I kind of realized relative to who's doing it well is, well, wait a minute, where are some of these services and how do you find some of those? And so, you know, we kind of said, you know, the IT department is not going to make the decisions on technology anymore because the millennials were coming in with so many great ideas. So there are tons of firms doing great jobs at that. You know, I'm not going to pick on any single one, but there's different types of innovation. The thing you got to realize is there's organic innovation. There's also something called fast follower, where it's like somebody else innovated, but we're going to build the same service and we're going to do it better. And by the way, a majority of the innovation out there is fast follower. Hey, somebody else, you know, the sharing economy is a big thing. Like instead of buying things, you share them or you rent them basically. And so there's a lot of new services, you know, basically coming into cities, for example. Instead of renting a car at the airport, you can rent a car for an hour in a city. So a lot of different things like that. But I think the big thing is, you know, understanding where you are at your company, what type of innovator are you, and building off of those strengths versus trying to say, I need to be like these guys. Build off your strengths that you're good at and iterate gradually off of some of those things relative to understanding your culture.
Yeah, excellent point. How do you increase engagement within the organization? Are you finding that leaders have bought into innovation and believe it as being a joining trend, or what are you finding? Well,
I certainly do think that that most companies would agree that innovation is one of the biggest challenges and opportunities. What I would say is one of the best things I've seen, and we saw it last week, is you recognize people for doing a good job, you know, whether it's for hard work or for innovation or for whatever, but thank them, recognize them, give them something, and you would be amazed what they'll give back. And, you know, I mean, I saw a post the other day that, you know, that a bunch of founders that were whining to their investors, like the millennials want too much stuff. Well, you know what? I mean, here's the thing is, you know, if you motivate people, and again, I was a soccer coach, but motivation is a phenomenal thing. But so is selecting the right people that you want to motivate. So employee selection becomes very, very critical, but recognizing good work and reinforcing that kind of behavior, people will want that recognition too. So even if, you know, that really is one of the biggest things I would say that's a takeaway from this.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of our customers have definitely come back and said that the reason they've been so successful is they make sure that everybody who takes time to submit ideas and all, they get acknowledged. You know, whether it's, you know, that their idea moves forward or not, they at least know what happened, you know, and that helps them have people come back over and over. And it's a big reason for success. So how would one search for jobs and innovation? This is interesting. We stated CEOs are looking for someone who can show their next source of revenue. So, you know, and the reason I picked this question also is because, you know, it's interesting. I started at Bright Idea about a year ago, and, you know, we talked about how a lot of innovation program leaders it was the first time in their jobs, right? And now we're starting to see more and more demand for these folks that are really driving and managing and leading the innovation programs within companies. And so they're now going to their second job. So interesting question here of how do you search for these jobs, and then how do you find people?
Well, you know, that's really interesting, because I think, you know, a lot of companies don't always call it like the innovation program office. Some of them do, but some of them, you know, they have different terms that they have institutionalized. So, you know, and many of them have very rigid, you know, quality processes that are really about innovation, but managing innovation. So I don't, you know, but here's the thing, it is recognized that there is this building momentum towards making innovation more of a program. So again, whether it's, by the way, digital transformation would be another code word I would start looking at, because there's a lot of people that are talking about digital transformation, which is innovation. It's just basically taking analog processes and making them digital. So I think there's a bunch of different search terms that are probably going to be working. I don't think it's totally harmonized around the innovation program office yet, but I mean, that's probably one of the best ones I would use.
Yeah, makes sense. So just a couple more questions I think would be good. One is on budgeting, which is, I think, an interesting area to look at, because I know we hear from folks constantly, particularly if they're just getting started in innovation. How do you budget for it when you don't know yet what you're going to get? So this one is, how do you see the more effective innovation-driven companies budgeting for innovation? And is it budget just for the innovation resources, like people or consultants, or actually for the projects?
Well, that's kind of a fascinating question. So, I mean, look, business units have money if they need like software to help them do stuff better. They have money for that. I think when you actually look at all the money that's spent launching products every year, really what it is when you talk about innovation, it's using that money and redirecting some of that to say at the earlier stage, which is how am I going to focus on not just, in fact, one of the big things is, pure R&D versus, near-term innovative products and services. And so we have seen a shift from R&D budgets to more focus on near-term deliverables. And so that's where you see fast follower. So, really what I would probably say is clearly large enterprises are going to say, we're going to throw out an edict, we're going to create a program office, and they're going to invest in that. But I think when you talk about the culture of innovation and those kind of approaches, it's just basically expected. It's expected that we have to differentiate what we're going to be doing. And when somebody does it, they get recognized, and it creates that behavior, and it keeps going over and over. And by the way, there are many companies that are innovating and disrupting, but they have a business revenue source that helps them fund the innovation. So when you're talking about how do I fund it, well, do you have a cash cow revenue stream? For example, Google, what's their revenue stream? It's advertising. It funds a lot of the new businesses. In fact, they even have a parent company called Alphabet now. So when you start looking at, do I have a funding source that is generating so much money that I should be diversifying and leveraging that and having alternative products and testing those? So that's really one of the big things, which is I have a current revenue stream. I need to siphon some of that off and invest in these new products and services. For example, digital products that are mobile enabled, because if I don't, by 2020, there will be large numbers of business that waited to be fully digital or to be mobile enabled. Their competitors did, and they're out of business.
Yeah, no, very true. Some excellent points. And I know we're just about out of time, so I do really want to thank everybody who is still with us for taking time. I know holiday season is very busy, so thank you again. I hope you found this content very informative. Jim, absolutely appreciate all your insights that you've shared. And I'd like to encourage everyone to check out our website. Again, I've mentioned the new apps we have to help with design thinking, hackathons, 20% time and more. Please go to brightidea.com. And we also do have a Hangout Thursday for scaling your innovation program. SAP and Tata Consulting will be on if you would like to join us. Jim, again, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate all your insights. And I hope everyone got some value out of this, and we definitely will send and share the record. Have a great day, all. Bye-bye.
Take care.